of all, Mr. Lupe Contreras, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for being on the boxingbar.com.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, man. Like I said, anytime we get a chance to speak with people who promote the sport, I'm very happy to do so. I always tell people that being a boxing fan is kind of tough. You know, if you watch football or baseball, you've got entire networks dedicated to that sport. But with boxing, you got to aggressively look out and search for information. So anytime you have somebody who provides it to the public, I'm more than happy to be a part of it.
And let's go ahead and start. Where were you born and raised?
Well, I was actually born in Reynosa, Mexico, which is right across the border from the southern tip of Texas. But I grew up in Houston. We came over when I was about 5 years old and pretty much raised here in the Houston area. I went to school here, attended college, although I didn't graduate college, but I have enough college hours to be a doctor as far as I'm concerned. But I did go to school here, and that's where I grew up.
And what was your childhood like?
Childhood was great. You know, my family, it's a very close-knit Mexican family. I have 4 brothers and 1 sister. We all live here in the city. We live probably at the most, maybe the guy who lives the furthest is my younger brother, who's about maybe 20, 30 miles away. But everybody else lives in pretty close proximity. I've got a couple of brothers and sisters that they all live in the same neighborhood as my parents, so it's pretty close-knit. We see each other quite often, and everybody gets along really, really well.
And what was your personality like as a kid growing up? Were you quiet? Were you shy? Were you outgoing?
You know what? I was pretty quiet. I had an issue with my vision, and I still do. I was actually cross-eyed as a kid. And, pretty severely, where, you know, one eye was facing one way and one eye was going the other way. So I got teased quite a bit for it, and I think that kind of made me be a little bit more introverted than usual. But as I got older, I learned to control it, and also once, you know, I got into late adolescence, I was prescribed contacts, which helped out a lot and helps the vision. And even now and then, every now when I have to read something up closely, I'll look at some of the video that we shoot, and you can see my eye going a little bit inward at times. But I think that kind of made me a little bit quieter. And as a matter of fact, some of my friends that I've come across lately, they're amazed to see me, you know, in front of people and actually directing an audience or a crowd, because they thought I was very shy and very introverted. But I always tell people being in front of a crowd is a lot different than being in a crowd. I have more of an issue being in a crowd than being in front of one. For some people, I get more nervous once I'm among a big group of people than being in front of one. It's a lot easier for me.
Wow. And as growing up as a kid, did you have a lot of friends in school or whatnot, or did having let's say your eyes crossed, did that keep you from having friends?
You know, I had a small group of friends. As a matter of fact, one of my friends that I went to all the way from elementary to middle school, he's still a guy that I probably talk to every single day. He actually lives in Vegas, so I get a chance to see him quite often with all the action that we do out there in Vegas. But it was a pretty small group of friends. Actually, I think for the most part, my friends were my brothers and sisters. You know, we would hang out and play basketball or just hang out at the house and play some sort of, you know, activity. I did have a small circle of friends. It never really prevented me from making friends. It just made me more selective of the type of people I guess I hung out with. You know, the ones that were a little bit more aggressive with me and perhaps a little bit more abusive, I tended to stay away from. But the ones that hung out with me and were I guess a little bit more of the nerdier group. So we all had our issues. So, you know, maybe one of us was cross-eyed, the other one was a little bit too chunky, and, you know, another guy maybe, you know, had some other things going on. So we tried to accept each other for their faults, warts and all, as they say. So it didn't really prevent me from having friends. It just made me more selective as to who I hung out with, I think.
And were you a pretty active kid? Were you athletic? Were you good in sports?
You know what? I was terrible in sports. Of all my brothers, I was the only one that never played any type of organized sport. My older brothers, as well as my younger brother, were great at baseball. I was the only one who never really played baseball. I think, you know, due to my vision and due to some other issues, I always tended to shy away from team sports. I never wanted to be the scapegoat, you know, to pull the Bill Buckner and have the winning shot go right through my legs. So I never really participated in team sports. I was more of an individual sport type guy. You know, I did some running, you know, things of that nature, but never participated in the team sport. I was athletic in the sense that I always, you know, stayed in shape and played, you know, like I said, basketball around the house or baseball with my brothers and stuff. But as far as actually being a jock or an athlete, no, I never was.
And what were you like as a student in school? Were you pretty good? Did you get good grades and all that?
I was pretty good. I was lazy, but I was pretty good. You know, I always had pretty decent grades. They could have been much better if I had actually studied. I was blessed with a really great memory, so I would hear stuff in class, and then, you know, right before the test was, I would, you know, cram for like an hour or so. and make some decent grades. But I think if I had actually, how do you say, put a little bit more effort into it, I think I could have done a lot more.
What was your favorite subject?
My favorite subject was history. I used to really like, memorizing facts and kind of regurgitating them. Like I said, my memory was really good. So I think with history, it was one of those things where you just remember things and spit them back out. And I used to do well in tests. I was also one of those people that the subjects where I could, BS a little bit, those are the ones I did really well in. When it was either right or wrong, like math or science, I had a little bit more of an issue there. But when it came to writing or doing oral presentations and just regurgitating facts, I was really good at that.
You know, it's funny that I kind of knew you were going to say history. Was on your website either yesterday or the day before, and I saw a bunch of pictures. I think I saw you like in Egypt or something with the pyramids in the background. It looked like one of them might have been Rome, and for some reason I kind of knew you were going to say history there. And is that something that you still love?
Yeah, I mean, I still do. When I go to bed at night, I typically it's either going to be on the History Channel or some type of science that that I'm watching. So yeah, it's always been something that's been curious for me. Like you said, on those trips that I took to Rome and Egypt, it was actually a combo trip where I was really into the series Rome that was on HBO, and I said, hey, that would be a nice little trip to use the frequent flyer miles on. And so I made a little combo trip. I went to Rome for a few days and went to Egypt, saw the pyramids, and then went back to Rome for a little while, and then came back home. But yeah, it still piques my interest.
It's funny you say that. I'm like a big history buff. My TV, it never leaves the History Channel, the Biography Channel, the Travel Channel, or in all those documentary type channels. I could watch that all day, every day. And my girlfriend, she gets on me all the time because of it. But that's what I love.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'll watch it whenever. Anything that I learn very well from listening. I'm not a good reader. I wish I was a reader. I'd be a lot smarter. But when I read, and my mind tends to wander, and I'll get to the bottom of the page, and I have no idea what I just read. But there's some things that when I watch it, it sticks in my memory pretty easily. And like I've told you, I fall asleep a lot of times to those types of channels, and I have this theory that when I'm asleep, I'm actually hearing what's going on because there's some things that I know or some facts that I know that I have no idea how I know them, and I'm thinking I probably heard them while I was sleeping.
Everything you're saying is exactly like me. I go to sleep to that all the time, and when I read a book, same thing. If it's something that doesn't get my interest, I will not know what I just read. I could read 10 pages, I won't know anything I just read. But when it's in front of me in pictures and sound and all that, I grab it and I never forget it.
Yeah, I work the same way.
And you said it was easy for you to do oral reports or get in front of the class and do stuff like that. Was that easy for you back then?
Yeah, you know what? It actually was. As I tell people, with being a ring announcer, I never realized that just going back, back to my adolescence, there were certain skills and certain abilities that I was honing back then that pretty much allowed me to do what I do now. I was in a theater group when I was about 17 or 18 years old, and we would go in front of audiences and kind of. It got to the point where somehow I just kind of evolved into the MC of the events that we would do, and so early on I started doing things like that, and I think it's sort of without knowing, or I mean I'm not going to say that it was something I was truly working on, but just kind of it just developed on its own, and it allowed me to pick up some of those skills as far as public speaking and being able to get in front of an audience, and slowly but surely you get more comfortable and you learn how to work a crowd or have them react to you as opposed to you reacting to them.
And did you have a job while you were going to school or while you were in high school?
Actually, I did. I worked in the ballet and theater district when I was in high school as an usher. And of all things, I think it's kind of funny. I used to wear a tuxedo back then, so a tuxedo seems to be part of my repertoire now. So I think that's what kind of lets me know. I was destined to wear a tuxedo as a profession because I started off pretty much there. And like I said, that also helped a lot. You were exposed to the public. You got to see how things ran. And I used to do the PA announcements there at the theater, so it helped me do some broadcasting. And then once I left that and I was in college, I actually started working in radio as well.
It's kind of weird how you're saying all these things, and a combination of all that is still what you do today. like you're saying, you dressed in tuxedo. You were an usher. You had to deal with the public or with people, and you didn't seem to mind being in front of a class or in front of people.
No, as I tell people, the skills that I have now really do me absolutely no good in any other profession except being a ring announcer. And thank God the profession exists. Otherwise, God knows what I'd be doing. But yeah, I mean, there's certain skills that I picked up when they were looking for somebody to fill the position that I have. They wanted somebody to be bilingual. They wanted somebody who had some public speaking experience. They wanted you to look a certain way. They wanted you to have some knowledge about boxing. And I mean, those were all things that I kind of picked up along the way. And if you look for that specific, I guess criteria in any other job, it doesn't exist other than in a ring announcer. So it was very fortunate and very serendipitous for me to be a part of it.
What'd you do directly after high school? Did you go on to college or do anything like that?
I did. I went directly into college. Back at the time they called it RTV, which is radio and television. I studied that briefly. As I told you, I wasn't a great student, so when I was in college, it became a little bit more challenging for me in the sense that you really have to study and really put a lot of effort into it. But while I was in my first year of college, a friend of mine told me that a radio station was looking for someone to be a disc jockey. And she said, why don't you go give it a shot? So I called up the radio station and said, hey, I want to work for you guys. And, I thought they were going to tell me, oh, well, we want somebody with experience or whatever. But unfortunately for me, it was a very small radio station. And they said, hey, come on in. Let's give you a try. So I went into the studio, and we did a quick recording, and I started working for those guys. And then from there, just kind of jumped around radio stations here in Houston and in Texas, and did that for about 9 years or so.
And if it would have been your choice when you first jumped onto radio, television, or being on the radio, if it would have been your choice to choose what you wanted to talk about or broadcast or whatever, would it have been music? Would it have been a sport? Would it have been news? What would it have been?
One of the things that I did pretty much everything in radio that there was, as far as the only thing I didn't do, I never did talk radio. And I think that's really where I would have liked to have been, with ever evolving topics and different people calling in and you getting to interact with listeners. When you're a disc jockey playing music, it gets really repetitive. You're obligated by the radio station to play, certain songs in certain orders. You have to read certain, what they call liners, which are information that they push out there to the radio station. And what a lot of people don't realize is, I mean, you're there for 4 or 5 hours, and the rotation is very tight in the sense that these songs are playing, the same songs are playing maybe every 20, 30 minutes. So you're hearing them over and over again, and it can get pretty redundant and repetitive. So I think, looking back on it, if I had the opportunity, I would have liked to have done talk radio.
And just, I guess, a side question, when you do work at a radio station and like you're saying, the songs have to be repeated, and I know the radio stations around my area, they always do that. They play a song probably, 2-3 times an hour. Is that because maybe a particular, brand or a particular company pays a radio station to be playing that song so often? Or is it just because it's supposed to be like a top 10 hit, so that's why they keep playing it?
No, it's actually legal to have somebody pay to play music. What they do is they have a lot of people that actually put a lot of work into it. When people would listen to radio stations, typically they listen to them at maybe 15 to 20 minute intervals when they're driving somewhere in their car, or maybe they get a chance to listen to it while they're working out. There are very few people that listen to one radio station the entire day. So they're basically, the way they've broken it down is the fact that individual people listen in 20, 30-minute intervals. So, they'll only listen for those 30 days the entire day. I mean, those 30 minutes the entire day. So they'll hear that song once. But if the disc jockey is playing it, obviously you're repeating it over and over again. So each individual person only hears it a few times, or they hear the information only once. So that's why they repeat it so often. That's why they kind of push it down people's throats. And you have what are called high rotation songs, which basically are the big hits that are popular right now. And then you have the recurrents, which are songs that are always going to be popular. And then you have the ones that have kind of fallen into the second tier rotation, that maybe they were popular at one time and aren't so much popular anymore. So they have a lot of science and stuff that goes into it, or studies, I should say, more than science. They'll have people researching it. What song do you like? What song do you not like? And And it used to be that each city had its own brand of radio, but not for the most part. Like everything else, it's so national that if I go to LA, I'm hearing basically the same thing I hear in Houston, right here in New York. There might be some difference, but for the most part, you're hearing it's a national radio station as opposed to local or regional anymore.
Yeah, and I believe it's psychologists that do that, or that kind of uh, play a part in that. I know, like, there's psychologists that go, like, in a grocery store, let's say, before they open, and they walk in there and they tell the store where to put the candy, or to put the candy by the register, because kids are going to be asking their parents for it when they're in line with them, and so on and so forth. And when you think about it, yeah, it is kind of psychology for them to think of all those things like that, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of programming strategy. I mean, there's people that make a living on that. I have a friend of mine who's actually on Facebook, and he goes from station to station telling them what they should play, what songs not to play, what people like, what people don't like. Some of it is a little bit overblown in the sense that, I don't think it gets that scientific. I think if you play a song enough times and people hear it over and over again, they start liking it after a while. I know there's some songs that I used to hate, and I've heard them so much, I'm like, oh, well, that song's not so bad anymore. But I think it just kind of got beaten into my brain after a while.
Yeah, I think most of the songs I really love, I think I hated them at one time or another.
Yeah, I'm sure.
How was the voice or la voz del boxeo discovered?
Well, actually, I won a contest of all things. I used to train with a guy in Thai boxing, and at the time I was working in radio. And as I was training there, he started to promote some small, hotel type fights. And he knew that I had some public speaking experience, so he said, do you want to be the ring announcer? I said, sure. I always wanted to give it a try. And I think he rented the tux for me or something, and I did like 2 shows for him. And at one of those shows, somebody took a picture of me in the tux in the ring. And then one day, I had woken up really early in the morning. It was like on a Sunday. It was about maybe 4 or 5 in the morning. And I was flipping through the channels, and all the other channels were infomercials except for Univision, which was the station that was running, or the network that was running the contest. And I saw a commercial that said, if you want to be, the next voice of boxing, or la voz del box, tune into the show República Deportiva, and that will give you all the details. So I waited up, and this was before DVR, so I waited up and saw the details of the show. They wanted you to send a picture, send in some audio, and they would choose from there. So I took the picture that they had taken of me at one of those fights. I recorded an audio. I went back to one of the radio stations that I work with, and a friend of mine helped me record a CD. And I sent it in, and shortly after that, I thought, oh well, I had kind of forgotten about it because I figured they had gone with somebody professional. And they called me back and said that, hey, you're one of 10 finalists that have been chosen. They flew us out to Miami. We did a live audition on the show. Out of those 10, they narrowed it down to 4. And out of those 4, we each got to do a live show. And they liked my performance the best. And from there, I thought they were going to say, hey, I hope you had fun. It was nice meeting you. And I'd go on my merry way. But it turns out that, boxing is a very small community. If you work well with someone and you tend to be, low maintenance, they tend to keep calling you back, and that's really what happened. It just kind of snowballed from there.
And going into, like, let's say a contest like that, is there something that, or are you just natural at it, or is that something you practice, or do you go in the shower and start singing, or what type of practicing, or how do you prepare for something like that?
You know what? I really wasn't quite sure how to prepare. I sort of just, I had seen ring announcers before, like Mike Buffer and Jimmy Lennon. So basically, I just kind of emulated what they had done, and went in there, and obviously they were looking for somebody bilingual and to have a little bit of a different flair. What was kind of interesting when we went to the show, I was one of 2 guys that actually wore a tuxedo. Everybody else was just wearing suits or maybe even casually dressed. And I realized that, ring announcers do it wearing tuxedos, so I was one of the only ones that wore one. And I guess that kind of helped me stick out a little bit. And also, I was the first guy out, and I think that kind of helped to set the bar a little bit. And if you're the first one or the last one, people tend to remember you. And I think it was just, some key moments and some fortunate placing and just, a lot of, fortunate accidents that put me in a position to get the position that I have.
And the first time you went up there on nationally televised, or in front of a nationally televised audience, to do a gig or to do an assignment like this, was it hard for you? Was it easy for you? What was it like the first time you did a whole event by yourself?
When I first went up there, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. Um, I vividly remember the show. It was a casino in Concho, Oklahoma, which is basically in the middle of nowhere. On a Sunday afternoon, which was when the Solo Boxeo show used to run back on Univision. Um, and I don't remember being nervous, but when I look back at the video, I actually have a copy of it. I look very stiff, and you evolve as a ring announcer because now you're a little bit more casual. You put a little bit more flair into it. You kind of ham it up a little bit. I think at first when I first started doing it, I kind of just when they would give me my cue, I'd try to go through the information as fast and as accurately as possible. And I figure the sooner I get this over with, the less opportunity I have to screw up. And I think now you play with it a little bit more. You play with a little more with the intros, and you kind of revel in the moment a little bit more than you used to. Now you're kind of like, oh, what? I only got 30 seconds, and you're wanting to have a minute or you want to have a minute and a half of actual presentation time. So I think now you toy with it a little bit more, and you play around with it more than you used to. And just, like I said, just kind of ham it up a little bit and evolve your presentation.
And before going into your first boxing event to do your first nationally televised, I guess, audition, what did you know about the sport of boxing?
Actually, I knew quite a bit. I was a huge fan of boxing. I used to watch that series, Tuesday Night Fights. It used to be on USA religiously. And I remember it being kind of funny when I was growing up. We were kind of middle lower income, and we only had one television in the house, and that show used to air at 8 o'clock our time, if I'm not mistaken. But that was also the time that my mom's novela used to air. So she got priority, and luckily for me, USA would repeat that boxing series at midnight. So I would wait until midnight to watch it while everybody else was asleep, and I had the TV all to myself. So I saw a lot of the guys coming up, like Riddick Bowe, and I think Vargas fought on there a few times, and some of the guys that went on to be pretty successful. So I picked up a lot of knowledge, and like I said, working out at the kickboxing gym also picked up some things there. So that helped me a lot when I went into the contest because I knew the difference between a draw and a majority draw, a split decision, things of that nature. I came in there with that knowledge when some of these other guys, they really were just kind of going into the win the contest, and they weren't too familiar with the sport itself.
Wow, you brought up Tuesday Night Fights from USA. Man, I used to watch that religiously too. And yes, Fernando Vargas did make his pro debut there. I was there. I live up the street from the Oxnard Performing Arts Center, and I know you've been here a few times announcing, I believe. And
I have, yes.
What are some of your favorite venues?
Vegas obviously is one of my favorites just because of the fact that when you're there, you feel like you've made it to the major leagues. The MGM, Mandalay, places like that. LA is a great place to do boxing events because it's you almost feel like you're in Mexico, because of the big fan base that exists there. This weekend I got my first chance to do an event at Madison Square Garden, which obviously is a huge venue for boxing. It's had so much history behind it. But I think for the most part, being in Las Vegas, it's really kind of hard to compare or to compete with that because you look around and you see all the celebrities. At one point, I remember I was at I think it was the Hatton Mayweather fight. I had done part of the undercard, and I went into the backstage area, and I was waiting for someone in the hallway. And at one point in the hallway, it was David Beckham, Brad Pitt, and Angelina Jolie, and me just kind of standing there. And I was, okay, one of these people doesn't fit into this picture, So you're always amazed at who you run into and who you see at these events, and how really large they tend to become. They tend to be bigger than the sport sometimes and be more social and events where people want to be seen and have to be seen because it's such a big thing to be there.
When you first started, was it hard for you to adjust to what it's like to be inside a ring with all the chaos that's going on, let's say before the main event of one of your fights or one of the fights you're announcing, all the people or the two parties, maybe trash talking or looking at each other bad, knowing that they're going to get it on right after you're done announcing it. Does that ever run into your head, or do you feel that tension and pressure and while you're doing it, or did you ever?
It tends to be more of an issue after a big fight because everybody tends to, for some reason, everybody wants to be in the ring, even though they serve no purpose being in the ring. Everybody wants to be in there, and it seems like no one is aware of the camera itself. There's many times when you're in the ring and people are standing right in front of you, and they don't realize that there's a camera that's there, or they'll put a flag up and it's right in your face, or people just don't seem to be very, I guess, conscious of the fact that there's a camera and this is going out to the world. So those tend to be kind of distracting and sometimes annoying. Or what gets to me sometimes too is I'll be standing in the ring and I'll be waiting for a cue from the stage manager, and people for some reason feel the need to come up to you and start talking to you while you're waiting for the fight to begin. And you try not to be rude and you try not to dismiss them, but it's kind of hard to get in a conversation with them if that cue comes at you. You're going to be having a conversation with someone on national television. So it can be a bit distracting in the sense that there are a lot of people in there. And oftentimes a lot of people will come up to you and they'll be like, who won? And it's like, I'm going to tell you in just a few seconds, or, you give me a chance, or they want that answer before you can actually give it to them,
And do you ever get nervous just knowing that you're going to read the scorecards? Both parties are waiting for this moment, like you're saying. They're even asking you to tell them now. Do you ever feel tension, or do you ever feel that pressure of or get nervous just from knowing that you're about to read who's going to win, and one party's not going to like it, the other one, you don't know what's going to happen from there on?
Yeah, at times you do. I mean, at times you get some decisions where, you're like, wow, I didn't see that fight that way at all. But I've come to realize that it's not my job to judge the fight, and I try to go in there without having a preconceived notion as to who won the fight, because it's gotten me a little bit off at times before, because I'll go in there thinking I know who won, and even a little cocky at times when they'll give me the scorecard, and when I look at it, it's like, wow, it's something totally different than I expected. So it kind of throws you off a little bit because you receive something that you really did not foresee coming. And yeah, it can be kind of tough where sometimes the fighter will stand right in front of you and look at you, waiting, in anticipation to hear the result. And you just see his heart break when you read the other guy's name or how the scoring came about. And it can be kind of tough. I mean, like I said, all these guys sacrifice so much. They literally, bleed and get beaten in that ring and physically suffer. And then at the end of it, there has to be a victor and there has to be a loser. And certainly it's tough being the guy who has to break those news to them. And, sometimes people get upset. I'm always amazed that people, still get upset with me when I read a decision, even though I'm just a messenger. But, every now and then they'll come up to me and they'll start griping. And, it's really hard for me. I'll typically just let them, let out their frustration and just kind of listen to them. But sometimes I have to remind them I'm just the guy who reads it. I'm not the guy who actually decides who wins or loses.
Have you ever been involved in a hostile environment, people throwing stuff in the ring after they hear a decision, or people getting into a brawl inside the ring? Have you ever been involved in anything like that?
Yeah, it's happened a few times. I mean, a couple times in Tijuana, we've had some, we've gotten showered with things in the ring. There's been a few scuffles that have broken out. I've even had I believe it was Roger Mayweather snatched the microphone from me one time and went on this tirade because he wasn't happy with the decision that was read. So it happens every now and then. And like I said, people. The thing about when they hear the decision, you're the guy reading it, and typically you're right in the center of the ring, so they have to aim for something. So they might as well aim for you. I don't usually take it personally, but certainly sometimes you have to have some thick skin and just realize that they've got to be upset at someone, and you're the one who said it, so that's who they're going to be upset at.
Right. Did you announce that day when I don't know if you remember when who was it, Jose Cotto went off on his uncle, his trainer, the other Cotto, the trainer Cotto, and he went off.
I did in Puerto Rico, right?
I believe so. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, it was.
Cotto didn't. Miguel Cotto stopped talking to his own uncle, and he would train with them, but they didn't talk at all, or something like that.
I was there. It was a solo boxeo fight in Puerto Rico, and he was fighting, I believe, a Thai fighter. I can't remember his name, but it was kind of interesting. I sort of kind of got a kick out of it because they actually would fight, but just during that break, the 60-second break in between rounds. But when it came time for the bell, boom, they're back in. He was back in action. So it was kind of weird because I think even the commentators made a remark as to, he's having to fight the guy, for those 3 minutes, and he has to go and fight another minute in his corner. And I remember there was, I think somebody threw a punch. I don't know if he threw a punch at the uncle or the uncle threw a punch at him, and then Miguel Cotto came out and was in the corner as well, and it got pretty. It was one of the more bizarre moments that I've seen, definitely.
Absolutely, and I think that's why I brought it up. Just like I'm going to take this off the record. Why doesn't Telefutura have, or like after, let's say, a solo boxeo, they should have a show. I remember on I believe it was the Versus channel. They would have sometimes a Thursday night card or something, and then afterwards, I believe it was Michael Buffer. He had it was Michael Buffer. He had a classic. It was like a classic fights type of little show, and he would show like a classic fight, like let's say Ali and Frazier or something. He would announce it at the beginning. He would kind of introduce it and talk about what was going on in the backgrounds. They would show kind of clips of that. Then they would show the first few rounds or whatever. Go to commercial, come back. He'd give you an insight of what's going on. Then go back to the fight and show a few more rounds. Go to commercial, come back. And it was kind of cool how they do that. I've never understood why they don't have some kind of classic fights like that on Telefutura when there's so much interest in boxing. I mean, you see the results in solo boxeo every weekend.
I think a lot of it just comes down to who owns the right to that footage.
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to that. I know Fox Deportes has one called Noche de Campeones, where they go back and show some fights like Acebache Martinez, some of the Daniel Zaragoza, some of those guys that were big in Mexico in the late '70s, early '80s. And I know they have a series that they do that. I don't think they document it quite the way that the Versus show did. But I think it really just comes down to who owns the rights, who gets to show it, and sometimes it can be a budget issue. And I've always thought the same. There's so many fighters that I've heard of over and over again, but you just can't find footage on them.
Yeah, well, even like I think it's his name's he has a show name in this corner. His name's James Smith. He was like my third interviewee, and we were talking. He's the only guy that has a show that he gets a particular boxer, whether it be a present boxer or a past boxer, and he interviews them for 30 minutes. He even does like an in-ring session, like where he gets in the ring with them and he tells them, if somebody was doing this, what would you do, and that type of stuff. But before he does that, he interviews the guys about what their life was like or what they like a little biography, and there's but he doesn't know. Of course, he doesn't know Spanish, so he never has any Hispanic fighters or Mexican or Spanish speaking fighters on there. He's never had Barrera, Morales, any of these guys, and it's like if Michael Buffer could do something like that, I'm sure they could throw you to do something like that, and I think it would be great. It'd be something awesome to watch, especially after a show like Solo Boxeo.
I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities out there. Sometimes it just takes maybe you have the person in power who just doesn't quite have the same vision as some other people do. In certain networks, you have people who the person in charge of sports programming, just their own personal taste might not be boxing. It may be they like soccer or they like something else, and they don't focus as much. And when they do their budgets, they tend to budget more towards that area than they do boxing or baseball or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of little behind the scenes type things that, although to the layman or the person watching TV makes so much sense and so easy to do, it just becomes even a political type thing inside the network where it's kind of hard to have that actually come to fruition and actually make it on air.
And do you see a lot of those legends? I know like before main events, sometimes when they're trying to kill time or whatever, they announce maybe boxers from the past, and they'll come in the ring or something. And do you ever get announce people like that, like Ruben Olivares, Carlos Zarate, and guys like that, Pepino Cuevas?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we I know at this particular weekend, it wasn't me who did it, but Michael Buffer announced quite a few of the guys that were there whom had fought at Madison Square Garden. And you we tend to get a list of who might be there, who might not be there. The tough part is whenever you do that, you always seem to not realize somebody was there, and somebody always ends up getting offended because they got left out. And it's not a fact that you're trying to diss them or anything. It's just that nobody knew they were there.
Or not only that, they
And
don't look the same as they did 30, 40 years.
yeah, oh yeah, I mean, they're not 6 foot tall and full of muscles anymore. They're kind of a little bit different now. And yeah, you're right. They don't look the same. I met Juan Laporte this weekend. He was doing the play-by-play with Bob Sheridan on the international broadcast. And the last time I saw him was an old video that I have when he fought Salvador Sanchez. And the guy was ripped at the time, but that was like in the 70s. Now I saw him, I didn't even know who the guy was. Not because I didn't know him, but I just had never seen him in the way he looks now.
Wow, yeah. Well, Juan Laporte, I haven't seen him in many, many years. I
Yeah.
wouldn't know what he looked like either.
Yeah.
And who are some of the best promoters that you've worked for, or some of the best events or television stations, or do you like them all?
Well, I work with basically everyone, and I've had the chance to work with almost all the major promoters. From Top Rank to Main Events to Golden Boy to DeBell Entertainment. And for the most part, it just depends on how big the company is. Companies like Top Rank and Golden Boy, they have a lot of money behind them and a lot of experience. So, they tend to have larger staffs and just, bigger promotions. Smaller companies like Don Chargan Productions or maybe, DeBell Entertainment, they tend to be smaller operations. But for the most part, it's a scaled down version of what you see with Top Rank and Golden Boy. As opposed to it being at the MGM Arena, they might have it at the MGM Ballroom. They're still big events. It's just scaled down the size. But for the most part, all of them do a great job. It just depends on the stable of fighters they might have. The more money you have to pay fighters and to pay for big fights, obviously, the bigger the events are going to be. So it just really comes down to what funds and what money is there to promote the event.
And how did you come up? It seems like every ring announcer has their own little catchphrase or favorite phrase that they like to use in the ring. How did you come up with your catchphrase or ring phrase that you use? Veremos quién es el más macho. How did you come up with that?
Well, actually, when we were going for the contest in Miami, they asked us to come up with something similar to Let's Get Ready to Rumble, but they wanted something in Spanish. And I remember it occurred to me when I was actually on the plane on my way to Miami. I was looking out the window, and it just kind of came to me. I said, that's sort of what it's about. These guys are trying to figure out, quién es el más macho, who's the toughest guy in the ring, and really I went with it because I had nothing else. And I was actually kind of embarrassed to say it the first time I said it because I thought everybody was going to laugh, But I said, well, I've got nothing else. Might as well go with that. And now it's especially in Mexico, people really, it really catches on, and obviously it goes over better in Spanish than it does in English. But in Mexico, a lot of people will see you, and even though they don't know your name per se, they'll know the phrase, or they'll say, ahí va el más macho, or ese es el más macho, or whatever it might be. So it's a good way of distinguishing yourself. That's why everybody tends to try and come up with one or try and have one, because in this business you're either Michael Buffer or you're not. There's Michael Buffer, and then there's everybody else. So you have to find some type of niche and some type of tagline or some way for people to take notice of you. And, with me, it's been the fact that I can do it in English and Spanish, and then, a silly little phrase doesn't hurt either.
And how did you get the nickname La Voz del Box?
Well, actually, that was the name of the contest that I won. The contest was called La Voz del Box on La República Deportiva. And I guess just by default, since I won the contest, I became La Voz del Box. So that's where that pretty much came from.
And are you one of the first, or the first, Latin ring announcers that was on nationally televised, like a regular nationally televised boxing show that you know of, or?
I actually replaced a man on Solo Boxeo. I wasn't the first ring announcer on Solo Boxeo. It was a guy by the name of Danny Valdivia, whom I believe he had quite a bit of success working in Southern California and in that region. And I think it just got to the point where he was older. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he might have had some health issues, and they were looking for someone to kind of fill in for him. So I know he had some success. I think fortunately, what has helped me was basically I was younger, and just kind of came along at the right time. And guys like Michael Buffer and Jimmy Lennon get so many offers at times that they need someone to fill in. And fortunately for me, I was in a good position with Top Rank and with Golden Boy. That if Michael Buffer has a show in Germany or South Africa, or Jimmy Lennon has one in Japan, they kind of call me and had me fill in. So it has provided me, I guess, a good platform to showcase myself. And I think for the most part that's what's helped me more than anything else, is the fact that these guys have so much work and there's so much going on that sooner or later there's going to be a day when they're going to call you off the bench, and you got to fill in for one of these guys who, for lack of a better term, is the quarterback of the team. You got to come off the bench and fill in every now and then.
And in your opinion, how important is it to know Spanish announcing a sport like boxing, especially nowadays?
Well, without Spanish, I personally would not be here. If I only spoke English, God knows, what opportunities I would have in boxing. I mean, the fact that I am bilingual is what's helped me, I guess, go up in the ranks so quickly. As far as speaking Spanish, it gives me an advantage that I can communicate directly with the fighters. If you do a show, I mean, 70% of the guys in there are Spanish speaking only, or bilingual, or Hispanic of some sort. I mean, I've yet to do a boxing show where there was not a Hispanic fighter on the card. Even if it was just one, there's never been a show where somebody was not Hispanic, whether they be Mexican, Central American, Puerto Rican, or whatever it might be. There's always somebody of Spanish descent, and it does give me the advantage that I do, speak to them directly. Oftentimes, I'll be translating for some of the promoters, for some of the reporters, or just helping the fighters themselves. It allows me to do that when maybe one of the commissioners will ask them a question and their entire team doesn't speak English. So it does give me a chance to help them out and just have that one-on-one contact with them.
So you have done interviews and stuff like that?
Well, I've never interviewed people, but I've helped in the interview. I'll be the translator, or helping the person doing the interview, but I myself have never interviewed anyone now.
And have you ever froze up when you were introducing a particular fighter, like maybe somebody you looked up to, maybe somebody like Chavez or something like that?
No, you know what? I've never actually frozen up, but I remember as I'm introing them, the moment does kind of hit you at times when you turn around and there's, Chavez, or there's Holyfield, or Vargas, or De La Hoya, in the ring. So it does, I guess the grandeur of the moment does kind of come to you. I've frozen up on some small, I hate to call them insignificant fights, but fights that I couldn't even tell you who fought, but I definitely did have some brain cramps there where I, either stumbled or just kind of went blank. But yeah, I mean, I think after you do it so many times, there's bound to be a few goofs here and there.
And a question somebody asked me to ask, or one of my friends, I told him I was going to be interviewing you. He asked me to ask you, have you ever has a card that you've ever announced been so slow or boring where you've actually, kind of like in a way fell asleep?
There's, the thing about boxing is when boxing is good, it's great, but when it's bad, it's horrible. And I've never had there's been entire cards that have just been terrible, but when it's tough is when what they call the walkabouts. Oftentimes, what the main event that you see on TV isn't the last fight that we have at the actual venue. So, you'll have the main event, the entire crowd leaves, and then you still have maybe one or two fights afterwards. And, when the venue is empty and people have kind of seen enough boxing, those tend to be kind of hard to watch. Sometimes they're kind of hard to get through. We did a show a couple of weeks ago in Mazatlan where we had a total of 15 fights, and I believe that the two TV fights both went, the full 24 rounds, because there were two championship fights, and the ones afterwards, we still had like 6 fights to go after TV was over with, and I believe we started like at 5:30 and didn't finish till like 1 o'clock local time. So that's a lot of boxing. That's a lot of fights to watch, and some of them weren't great. So it does get frustrating after a while when you're there, and there's no one in the audience except for friends and family, and people just have seen enough.
What do you think of the other, or your either fellow announcers or your competing announcers, if however you might see them? What do you think of guys like Michael Buffer, Jimmy Lennon Jr., Joe A. Martinez, David Diamante? What do you think of those type of guys? Have you ever met them? Do you know who they are?
Yeah, actually, no. As a matter of fact, I met David Diamante for the first time this weekend at the weigh-in at Margarito Cotto, and he's pretty easy to pick out because of the hair. So I picked him up pretty quickly and just went up to him and just chit-chatted briefly, and we just kind of, it was a short conversation. I've had probably the most chance to work with guys like Michael Buffer. We worked together this weekend on the Madison Square Garden card, and I got to do the international fights, and he went with obviously with the main event and stuff. Jimmy Lennon, I just met him recently for the first couple of times, and they're all good guys. I get along well with all of them. Obviously from Jimmy and Michael, if you're a ring announcer and say that you haven't learned from them, you're either lying to yourself or just blatantly lying to everyone, because Michael for the most part is the standard as far as ring announcers are concerned, and Jimmy has been around so long as well. He's done so many major fights that he certainly has a big I guess a big image that goes along with some of the work that he does. So you pick up little things from them, and you see what works for them, and you try to emulate it, and you try to learn from them, but you try not to I guess do a full blown imitation of them, because obviously a Michael Buffer already exists and a Jimmy Lennon already exists. So you try to kind of carve your own little path there, but definitely you do pick up some things from them, and you see what they've done, you see what they've been successful with, and you try to mold it and make it your own.
Yeah, you know what? Jimmy Lennon, does he know Spanish? Does he know like fluent Spanish?
I don't know that he's fluent in Spanish. I think he knows enough to get by. Because a lot of the things that we do in the ring are fairly repetitive. So if you pick up a few phrases here and there, or he's really good at pronunciation. He's really good at pronouncing the last names and some of the cities. I don't know that he can hold a full conversation in Spanish, but he may be one of those guys that probably understands it better than he speaks it.
Yeah, not only that, he's a second generation. His father was awesome, and he sounds exactly like him. And
yeah, I mean, they're basically spitting images of one another.
Right, and they talk whenever they, like you said, whenever they say the Spanish surnames, they always say them exactly right. Michael Buffer rolls every R. I don't know if you've noticed when he speaks Spanish, he rolls every R as if it was a double R.
Yeah, that's how they know him in Mexico. They say Eric Morales. Yeah, so it's got to become a trademark for him now as well. Everything he does is trademark.
It seems like he's either going to school or something, or just starting to catch it a little bit. But I see him getting a little, or trying a little harder or something. But yeah, I've always wondered about Jimmy Lennon. I've always heard him say phrases in Spanish perfectly, and knowing that his father I think his father did know some Spanish or a lot. And,
yeah, I mean he works quite often in Latin America, so he's been doing it for a few decades now. So I'm sure he's picked up quite a bit along the way.
And do you ever, whenever you see their work, or we're watching them on TV, or watching an event with them on it, do you ever find yourself comparing yourself to them?
Yeah, I mean, you try to, like I said, those guys are the standard. They're basically the two best known ring announcers ever, in the sport. So you try to see what they do well, and you try to get up to what they're doing. I guess you can't really compare yourself because of the fact that they've been around for so long. I was talking to Michael Buffer this weekend, and he told me that he's been doing it for 39 years, if I'm not mistaken, which is quite a long time. I've been in it for about 10, so you have to take into account how long they've been doing it, and look at where they are and look what they have accomplished. But you also have to kind of, I guess, look at it relatively speaking, where you're like, okay, well, I've only been in it this long. I need to be proud of my accomplishments, and I have to realize that there's so much more to go and so much more to still, so many more dues to pay off. People always ask me, they're like, well, why aren't you doing the major fights? And it's like, well, everybody, there's only so many positions to go around. So I'm sure every guy in the NFL would like to be the starting quarterback, but you got to hold the clipboard every now and then and wait for your turn to get in the game. And just because you're not the starter on a particular team doesn't mean you're not any good. It just happens to be that that position's already filled and they already have the guy playing that position. So you just kind of have to wait your turn, pay off your dues, and wait to see what happens.
So when an event kind of like this weekend, how you brought up Cotto and Margarito there at Madison Square Garden, how do you get? I mean, does it depend on who's available for that weekend? Do they call somebody before they call others, or I mean, how does that go? Is there like a list, and if this guy isn't available or this guy, they'll have this guy, or is there like a preference?
I think there is a preference in the sense that for boxing, pretty much Michael Buffer is the face of HBO events, and then you have Jimmy Lennon, who's pretty much the face of Showtime events, which are the two major networks. Like I said, they also get a lot of work internationally, so they may have a prior commitment in Germany or Japan, and then they go up to the backups, which I have a good working relationship with Top Rank and Golden Boy. So typically, when like I said, it's a very small community. If you work well with them and they know they can rely on you, they tend to go back to the well over and over again. So they tend to trust you that you're not going to screw it up. You know exactly what you're doing. You've been around it long enough to kind of go by the format and you know how it works. You know not to talk too much or say anything inappropriate. So they know you're safe and they know that you can do a quality job. So they will call you back. But yeah, there is sort of a pecking order, so to speak.
So let's say you get called for an event, you show up to the arena. What happens from there? I mean, you get there, and what are the things you do first, or how do you go about it, or do you go look for the promoter? How does that go?
Well, typically, even before I get to the arena, I start preparing. They'll send me a bout sheet with all the pertinent information. The fighters' records, their weights, all that info. And I'll jot it down. I'll make my own little cue cards that I work off of. And everybody's cards look different. I was looking at some of Michael's cards, and he tends to write the card long ways, and I tend to do mine, kind of, I guess it would be like in the portrait form if you were doing it like on a word processor or something.
Like a landscape.
Yeah, landscape. There you go. And so I get those ready to go, and I always like to go into the locker rooms and talk to the fighters personally. Get their ring names. Some guys, maybe the bout sheet says they're from Denver, but they're really, fighting out of Fort Collins, or they once were in Denver and now they're living here and there. It always changes. It's always very fluid. So I like to go in there and confirm the information with them first. I also get my information from the commission, as far as judges, referees, who's being assigned to those fights, and kind of get my cards, finalized at that point. Also, there's also sponsorship information you need to know. Like for example, this weekend's show was sponsored by Tecate and AT&T, and the scripts always keep changing. This weekend what we had was AT&T. Their tagline went from AT&T, the nation's fastest mobile broadband internet, to just saying AT&T rethink possible. So they give you these things that you've been rehearsing for a couple of hours, and then all of a sudden at the last minute they say, hey, throw that out. This is what you're going to go with. So things are always fluid, things are always changing, and basically just gathering my information and just going into the arena and just getting a feel for the place. The sooner you get there, you start relaxing. You start, the crowd starts slowly rolling in. It's not like you get just tossed into, in there with 20,000 people already in the arena. So you kind of, get at ease with the place and sort of get accustomed to it.
Is it very different? You make it sound like everything, goes, or they kind of put it in a chronological order. Is it different in Mexico? Because I've noticed in Mexico, it seems like the announcers never know what's going on. It seems like they throw on a fight before they they had it on their sheets or whatnot, and it seems like they always they don't know what's going on themselves, the commentators or the ring announcers. Sometimes everything seems to be thrown off. Sometimes.
It's very different in Mexico. A lot of things are improvised. I think it's just part of the culture. We're so I guess we're so regimented here in the U.S. Where everything is. I always joke in Mexico where I'll ask them, hey, what time are we leaving for the event? They'll say, man, a las 5:30, 6, and it's like, man, that's like a whole hour of difference. Here maybe they might give you a 15-minute window. They'll give you like an hour and a half window. It could be any time during those, that hour and a half that they'll show up. But yeah, things tend to be a little bit more improvised, tend to be a little bit more casual. Everybody isn't, as strict on rules, regulations, and what goes on. But like I said, it's just part of the culture, and I think it. You just have to remember sometimes that you're not in Kansas anymore, and do as they do.
Have you ever had some real embarrassing moments or stories that you can share with the listeners?
Yeah, you get quite a few of them. Recently the Gamboa Ponce de Leon fight in Atlantic City. And I remember I was all proud because I was wearing like a new tuxedo and it fit really well. And once I did the intro and got off the ring, I realized my zipper had been down the whole time. Little things like that, or with tuxedos, they tend to look a lot alike, even though you're wearing different ones, but people don't tend to notice. We were at an event in Dallas one time. It was an HBO Latino show. And as I told you, once the main event ends, there's still fights that go on. So the main event had ended, and I was kind of ring because I could see the fighters were coming in. So I just kind of waited there. There was no sense in me getting out of the ring. And all of a sudden from the rafters, I hear somebody, it sounded like these guys had, a microphone in their hand. And they yell, pinche Lupe, siempre traes el mismo traje. You're always wearing the same damn suit. And it just echoed throughout the arena. And I had nowhere to go. I was just kind of standing there. And I remember the crowd just busted out laughing. And you just kind of had to take it and laugh along with them at that point.
Do they make you do that and wear a tux everywhere you go, or a certain tux, or wear certain clothes? Or is it pretty much up to you and you just decide to do that on your own?
Well, I think it's commonly accepted that the ring announcer does wear a tuxedo. I choose whatever tuxedo I want to wear myself. And I think, some people tend to go a little bit different with it. I feel most comfortable with it in the tuxedo, and it tends to be more appropriate. I know a few months ago we did a show in Key West, Florida, and we all wore guayaberas and like khaki pants, and it just didn't feel right for some reason. It felt kind of awkward, and you kind of felt almost naked in the ring. But for the most part, I decide what I wear, and there's only so much you can do with a tux, so you try to change it up. I pretty much have every style of tux there is, except tails maybe. But for the most part, they look very similar, and it's hard to tell that somebody is wearing a different type of tux.
And in your opinion, how do you think you're different than all the other ring announcers or all the people before, or maybe even after you?
Well, I think what distinguishes me is the fact that I'm fully bilingual. I think people enjoy the fact that when I speak English, there's not an accent, and when I speak Spanish, there's not an accent either, and I'm able to go between the two. I think for the most, that's really what differentiates me from everybody else, and really kind of has been my stamp as far as boxing is concerned. As far as from here on, I think people will be more inclined to expect other people to do that as well. And I think it'll be something that's going to be more common where you see, and I think you are starting to see a lot of different types of announcers now. For a while there you had, girls like Amy Hayes, who was doing announcing. You got guys like like you said, David Diamante that you just spoke of earlier, who is not your typical looking ring announcer with the dreadlocks and everything else. So I think they're starting to kind of experiment a little bit more with what a ring announcer should be. Even though, like I said, guys like Michael and Jimmy are always going to be the standard. I think even locally, I've seen some girls they look look more like ring card girls than announcers, but they'll be doing the role of announcer as well. So I think they're going to take a little bit more chances and try to experiment a little bit more once the profession of an announcer tends to continue evolving. But for the most part, I think the guy with the big voice and the guy who can kind of command the crowd will still always be pretty much the standard that people go for. I don't think they'll stray too much away from that.
And that's true. And there's people that are really going to like that traditional boxing ring announcer, like you're saying, in a tuxedo, deep voice. And there's people that might take offense to those people trying to break tradition, like others are. David Diamante is a very nice guy, awesome guy. And I'm not, pointing fingers at him. He's a great guy and a great commentator. But there is a lot of people that take offense, or people that kind of say, what is somebody like that doing in the ring? And I agree with that, I guess.
Yeah, people hate change. Anytime there's people who are very open to new ideas, and there's other people who are very closed off to it. So it's always going to be, kind of odd. I know that when I first started, if it wasn't a Latin event, or as they called it, or if the main event wasn't two Hispanic fighters, there were times when people wouldn't even take me into consideration. Where if it wasn't two Hispanic guys in the ring, they thought, well, there's no need to have a Spanish ring announcer or a bilingual ring announcer, and I just want to be a ring announcer as opposed to being the guy that I don't always have to do it in English and Spanish, or it doesn't always have to be a Spanish network. So yeah, I think people are slow to change at times, but it'll slowly evolve, and we'll see what works and what doesn't work, and some of those ideas will go by the wayside, perhaps.
Do you think you perform better in front of a big crowd, a very active crowd, or do you think you perform better during like a more stale or quieter crowd, or it doesn't matter? I mean, you can perform either way.
No, I mean, you definitely do better with a crowd that reacts to you. I enjoy the larger crowds much more than the smaller crowds. When you get to crowds of, I guess, over 10 and above, it stops looking like people. When you do I've done some really small venues, where we've had maybe 200-300 people, and you can see all the individual faces. You can see how they're reacting to you, and the larger the crowd, typically they're sort of easier to get going. Easier to get them revved up. When you have a smaller crowd, sometimes the crowd just isn't having it. They're not. They want you to put on a show as opposed to have them be a part of the show. And typically, when you have a really large crowd, I mean, the crowd is so jazzed up and so energized that you can sort of feed off of them, and then they can feed off of you as well. But if you're announcing and you're trying to get the crowd going and they're just not responding, it can be almost very, very a hard thing to do.
What's the best way you could describe being in the center of a ring? Let's say before a main event's going to be announced, or before you're going to announce it. Looking out at the crowd with all the cameras around, with all the people in the ring, the participants are going to be fighting that night, looking at you. Obviously, you're in the middle. You have full attention. What's the best way you can describe that feeling of all eyes on you, and what it's like to be in the middle of the ring there with the bright lights on you?
Well, you just kind of have to bask in the moment. You can't be intimidated by it. You got to just kind of soak it up. You kind of almost have to be a ham about it, to where you realize that this fight isn't going to get started until I get it started, and you really do kind of just soak it in. I know when I first started, it would sort of intimidate me, and I know my friends always ask me, they're like, "Aren't you excited to be doing the fight?" And I said, "Well, I try not to get too excited, because if I get excited, then I get nervous, and then things start to happen. So you try to go in there as calm as possible. But at times it can be kind of overbearing, but for the most part, I've learned to just kind of bask in it and just kind of enjoy the moment and just revel in it. I mean, you see the guys getting ready to go. They're so excited. They're so hyped up. And then you have the corners, which sometimes are even louder than the guys are. So it's like I said, just one of those things where I just try to enjoy it as much as possible and just feed off of what's going on around me.
And like you said, you probably worked for every big promoter that's out there. But if there's a new big promoter, and let's say he wanted to see your resume, or he was interviewing you for the job, um, what events that you've announced would you let him know, or would you tell him about that you would throw on that resume there that you think would impress him? What are those fights that you remember that you announced, uh, in the ring?
Well, I think for the most part, you gotta, if you were trying to I guess show them how deep your resume went. I think obviously you have to point out to some of the major events that have been televised on HBO and HBO Latino. Just the fact that they've gone worldwide and you've been able to deal with events of that magnitude and not crumble under the pressure. I would definitely point out fights like the Chavez farewells in LA and Phoenix. Those are definitely some major events there. Let them know that you've had experience in some of the bigger uh, states like Nevada, LA, New York, Miami, Puerto Rico, Mexico. Just let them know that you're not just a local guy. You've had the chance to go worldwide and travel to abroad, and you've been able to deal and perform pretty much anywhere and any time. And I think that's really what the promoters are looking for. I've always told people that the true sign of being a professional is not being demanding and being a bit of a diva. I think the sign of being a real professional is the fact that people hire you because you make their job easier. And I think people are. It sounds bad, but people are inherently lazy. They want to do as little as possible, and if they know that you're there and they know that their job's going to go easier and smooth and much more smoothly, they're going to keep calling you back because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for. I know there was a scene in Pulp Fiction where the two characters are kind of in a bind, and I guess Marcellus uh, tells one of the characters, he says, "Hey, the wolf is on the way," and the guy says, "Well, hey, that's all you have to say if the wolf is coming," and that's the way I kind of like to look at it, to where if they know you're going to be there, they can relax and realize that the job's going to get taken care of, and there aren't going to be any issues, and there's nothing for them to worry about. They don't have to coach you on what to do. You have all how to gather your information. You know how to take your cues. You know where to stand. You know where to wait. Regardless of how crazy the crowd gets, you're not gonna freak out, and you're gonna wait for until they tell you to go, and when it's time to go, you're gonna be ready to perform. Because with the events we do, they're live events, so you one shot and one shot only at doing it, and I think they need to have the confidence that when that cue comes, you're going to be able to take care of it, and you're going to be able to do it right. And for the most part, that's what I tell them, and let them know that I've been doing it for over 10 years, and certainly they're going to get quality work from a person that's going to make it as easy as possible on them.
And I saw your Facebook posting earlier about how, I mean, just this week alone, how much you have to travel, how much you have to be away from home. How does that affect your personal life? Um, or does that even affect it at all? Or is it better because of how much you travel and how much you get to see the world?
Well, I'm actually single and I have no children, so that helps a lot. I'm sure if I was married with kids, it would make things a little bit more difficult. This week tends to be a little bit heavier week. Tomorrow I fly out to Mexico and Tuxtla. We're doing the finals of a series called Campeón Azteca, which is kind of it's kind of a version of the Contender, so to speak. I guess is the best way to describe it. And then from there, I'm flying to a small show in Los Angeles, and then I'm also going to San Diego after that. So it can be a bit of a chore. I think when people think of travel, they think of vacation travel, and traveling for business and traveling for vacation are very different. You're getting up early. You might not get a chance to eat sometime. You got to get to the airport. Sometimes flights get canceled. There's so many things that can go wrong. So it can be a bit of a grind on you. But you do have a tendency to enjoy your time more when you're at home. I do get a chance to spend quite a bit of time at home. And when I fly out, that's when I actually work. But it tends to be a bit of a burden when, we typically work on the weekends when people are relaxing. So, you're not at the weddings, you're not at the quinceañeras, you're not at the family parties because you're off somewhere, doing a fight, you know. Uh, my neighbors,
or
I
you can
think.
never promise your parents.
No, I mean, you typically know when you might be off, but at the same time, who knows what might come up. But yeah, I don't get to go to a lot of family functions. I know I have a lot of relatives that I guess hadn't seen me since I was a child, and now that they see you on TV, they're always inviting you to come out to their quinceañeras or the weddings or whatever it might be. But I can never make it, not because of the fact that I don't want to be there. It's just that I have elsewhere to be on that particular day. Um, so it affects you in that sense. But relationship wise or with my own family, it's not that big of an issue. Oftentimes I'll travel. I'll invite my friends to come with me if we're going somewhere interesting. My parents love traveling with me. They like going to the casinos and stuff. So I'll take them with me if we're going to Vegas, if we're going to Oklahoma, or wherever it might be, just to you know turn into kind of like a work slash fun type thing. And so there are ways around it. It can be a bit of a grind, but for the most part, it's very manageable.
And is solo boxeo, is that a full year's thing? I mean, is it every weekend for the whole year, or do they have their off months?
Well, when I was there, yeah, it was 52. It was 50 weeks out of the year. The two weeks we would rest would be Christmas and Good Friday because our show was Friday, so you couldn't have boxing. It being such a Catholic audience, it was hard to have people beating each other up on Good Friday. So those were the 2 weeks that we would get off. But for the most part, it was at least 50 shows a year with solo boxeo. And then keep in mind I was also doing like HBO Latino, which aired on Thursdays. And then if we did a show on Friday, then another show might come up with a pay-per-view on Saturday. So it was at least 50 shows with solo boxeo and maybe another 20 or 15 shows with some of the other promoters or some of the other networks as well. So it got to be a bit of a grind at times. So I mean, you were constantly going, and you were constantly in different places. So it did get to be quite a bit of a haul there for a while.
What other sports or events did you have you announced in, or wrestling or anything like that? Have you ever done anything like that?
Actually, I've done quite a bit of MMA. I did the first season. There's a promotion called Bellator, which aired on ESPN Deportes for a while. It's on MTV2 now, if I'm not mistaken. But I did the first season of that. I've done Strike Force, which recently was bought out by the UFC. We did a couple of their events on HDNet. There was a series called HDNet Fights, which I did some MMA there as well. And I've started to do a lot of corporate events now where they'll have a charity event where you'll have like local politicians doing little exhibition fights against one another. Or I recently did one in Las Vegas, which was the Latino Hotel Owners Association, and they brought people from different parts of the country to kind of get in the ring and go at it for a little while. And they want to give it a little flair of authenticity, so they'll hire you to be the ring announcer. And those are fun. I mean, they're a little different, and it breaks from the norm a bit.
And being so young, Lupe, I know you still have a whole lot of years ahead of you.
Well, I'm not that young, but okay, I appreciate that. Though.
But how does Lupe Contreras want to be remembered once it's all said and done?
Oh wow, I feel like I'm terminally ill now or something. How do I want to be remembered? You know what? I just want to be remembered as a good person, I guess. A lot of people that I meet, I always find this weird. They're always like, "Man, you're nice and you're easy to talk to." I was like, "Why wouldn't I be?" I don't know what they expect. I don't know if they expect someone to be, stuck up or very vain or whatever. But first and foremost, to me, this is a job. This is how I pay my rent. This is how I buy my food. I don't think you should have a different type of attitude just because it happens to be a little bit out of the ordinary and you're working on television. I've never understood why people, a lot of times they'll compliment me for being nice, and to me it's like there's no reason why I shouldn't be nice, just because we tend to do something a little bit out of the norm. So I mean, just as a good guy who, like I say, who did a quality job, and if if someone can describe me as professional, I would take that as probably the biggest compliment that there is.
Well, being a ring announcer, I'm sure could lead you towards all the different avenues like broadcasting, acting, or anything like that. Would that be something you'd be interested in the future?
Actually, a few years ago, I did a scene in a movie. It was a movie called Love Ranch with Joe Pesci and Helen Mirren. It was directed by Taylor Hackford, who did. I'm sure growing up in California, you've seen Blood In, Blood Out. You know, he did Ray, Officer and a Gentleman. And to be honest with you, it was probably one of the most boring, mind-numbing experiences of my life. Uh, we were there for 4 days. I mean, they were like 16-hour days. One day I sat there and did absolutely nothing. I sat in the same spot for 16 hours. And the movie, it was less than great. I think it went straight to video. And out of those 4 days that I was there, the actual time that I'm on camera is, I think, like a second and a half. And we put in a lot of time, and it was just, I wouldn't say I wouldn't do it again, just because it was, it certainly is a lucrative thing to get into. But it's really mind-numbingly slow. It's a mind-numbingly slow process that I guess it really lets you know that Hollywood's not all it's cracked up to be. But yeah, I mean, if there's some opportunities to rise, sure, why not? I'd give it a try.
Let me go ahead and close it, but please stay on the line while I'm closing up, Lupe, so I can ask you one more thing after we close. But Lupe, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you for being one of the greatest ring announcers of my time, one of the best Latino ring announcers, if not the best ring announcer that's been through my time. And thanks again for all your time in doing this.
Oh man, like I said, thank you for being so complimentary, and as I said, being a boxing fan can be a bit of a chore sometimes. You have to actively seek out information and seek out news. So all you guys that are out there, putting stuff on the web and keeping people well informed, yeah, I think you guys are doing a great service for the boxing fan, and any chance I can get to help you guys out, I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you very much, Lupe.
Thanks.
All right, we'll go ahead and cut there, Lupe, but if I could just ask you for one huge favor.
Sure.
I'm thinking of doing like a little compilation for the opening of my site, like when you log on, of adding a bunch of people saying things like, or saying something like, hi, this is, whoever you might be, or state your name. Hi, this is, Lupe Contreras, and you are listening to theboxingbar.com, or something like that, whatever you'd like to say there. If you could just do something like that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I have a little Pro Tools studio here in the house, and I can, do something, and I can probably email it an MP3 for you, so it'll be, good quality audio, and you can do whatever you want with it after that.
All right, cool. Or you could even do it right here. You could just say it right here, and just close it off there.
Okay, whichever one you prefer. I mean, if you want me to do it, on here, I can certainly do it, and the other one would be much better audio if you'd like.
Okay, yeah. If you could do that, that'd be awesome. I'll just go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you what. I think you sent me your email address, so if it's not a problem, I can do it when I return and have it to you maybe like at the beginning of next week.
Oh, not a problem at all. I'd appreciate it very much. And also,
if you'd like, send me some things that you'd like me to include on the email, and we'll go from there. We'll play with it from there.
And actually, I was going to tell you the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and have your own page on my site. If we do further interviews down the line or whatever, I could post all your interviews on your particular page. If you could also please with that send me a picture. If there's a picture that you want me to use as your picture that I'm going to put on your page, if you could please do so. I don't have a picture of you.
Okay, I can do that as well.
Yeah, so if you could do that. And is it okay? I know you have a website. I know it's under construction. I tried to get on earlier to take some notes. Is it okay if I add a link to your website on my page or on your page, if I can?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Okay. Basically, my page my website is done. I'm just updating the pictures. The ones I had before kind of are false advertisement. They're kind of old. Okay. So, I need to update them a little bit, and I've just kind of been, slowly doing that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it should be up and running by the beginning of the year.
All right, cool. And if you have any announcements or anything you want me to throw on your page there, I mean, just send me an email, and I'll just throw it on your page so people can see what you're up to or whatever.
Okay, man. Well, like I said, I appreciate the time, and make sure you shoot me an email, and I'll definitely get that MP3 to you as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Lupe. Have a good night, man.
All right, man. Nice talking to you.
Thank you. Same to you.